All right, so 138A, welcome everyone. We are tasting 138 with Madeline Triffon, Evan Goldstein, and Tim Gaiser. And without further ado, we're going to get started here with wine number one.
The color is a surprise to me on this one. It is actually, you could, I guess, characterize it as a deep yellow, but I frankly would call it gold, a bright gold color. And when you have a white with that kind of depth of color, because we choose generally between straw yellow and gold, and then we moderate accordingly, that kind of depth of color can be due to, you know, more than one reason. It can be exposure to air through barrel aging. It can be bottle age, frankly, or a combination of both. It could be used, it could be reflective of skin contact as well. So hold that thought, don't draw any conclusions. And my favorite quote from Tim Gaiser, and having read the book, I still don't know if it made it in the book. There's a part of you that's always desperate to know what the wine is. So we don't draw our conclusion from the appearance. We just tuck it in our mind. So aromatically, this wine is lush. That is the first word that occurs to me. The fruit is quite ripe and very generous. And right on the heels of this perfectly ripe, I would really say cooked, but ripe, verging on super ripe, but, you know, correct. Tree fruit that I would define as yellow apple and probably Bosc pear. And maybe a little bit of tropical. And a little bit of, you know, peach and nectarine is spice. It's wonderful spice in the form of, you know, ginger or sesame, and a little bit of an illusion of sweetness, which I'll bet money is not going to be actually texturally sweet, but it adds to the ripeness of the fruit, and it comes across like a honeyed character to the wine. There is an impression as we go on and sifting through the categories, an impression of citrus, and it comes across like a nice refreshing back of lemon, and just nice tart lemon, and also down there, but coming through, and I'll bet money it's even stronger on the palate, is a little bit of a salty minerality that's very appealing indeed. Right off the bat, it comes across as being quite aromatic, but not in super highly aromatic fashion, like and I'm not eliminating these, I'm just throwing this out as an impression. It's not coming across like Gewürztraminer to me, but it does have a florality too that is just beautiful, however you want to define it. Fresh apple blossoms and probably lemon lime blossoms as well. It smells so appealing that I'm going to take it on the palate right now. I actually swallowed a little chunk of it because I'm greedy and I wanted that in my system. But immediately that honeyed impression is there, but the flavor, not the perceptible residual sugar. Acidity is surprisingly refreshing given the lushness of the wine on the nose. And there's that minerality. You know, it actually a brass band fashion. It's a salty rockiness to it that is wonderful because it adds to a lift and a refreshing aspect of this wine that I frankly didn't expect smelling it. So there is a cheerful, happy, slight disconnect between how the wine presents aromatically and how it tastes. This is not a negative thing. You know, it simply is how the wine is expressing itself at this moment. Sometimes I think we make a very big deal about balance, but it's not the be all and end all. And wines can actually be slightly imbalanced and still be very, very high quality, particularly when they're young. And an example of that is wines that are quite tannic to the point of shutting down the flavor a bit unless you're eating animal protein. So to regroup, and I'm going to take one more taste. This is a very rich, beautifully aromatic and expressive white wine that gives us a host of lush, ripe tree and stone fruit and citrus. On the nose, it's more Meyer lemon, and on the palate, it's more like a teeny little bit of grapefruit. and tart lemon and lime. Aromatically also, there's a fresh florality to it. There is spice in the form of ginger root. There are other fragrances as well, notably saffron and chamomile. If I want to get slightly precious, there is on the palate bracing acidity. I would call it medium plus. The wine is very long. It's got plenty of complexity, and it is going to gain complexity with a little more bottle age. And there's one more flavor that I think is important that I didn't mention, and it comes through on the aftertaste, is a nuttiness, specifically almonds, and a little bit of bitter almond character that frankly can be considered a thumbprint for this wine for whatever that's worth. So hold that thought. Done describing Limang. So we should go on to our options.
So what you see right now are options on the table. We've got a poll. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, this is an anonymous poll. You can put your answers in. We don't get to see who did what answer. If you don't have one of these choices in your mind and you picked something else, put other, and then tell us in the chat what else you picked so that we can use that as a teaching moment to talk about it. But this is, if you're looking at our website, sometimes we do have slightly different options between the website and the webinar, because we're here to explain some things. On the website, we might give some easier choices to help you delineate what it isn't. So on that note, while people have some more seconds to fill it in, Madeline, just a very basic question. Why are you spitting? You know, why do we spit when we taste?
Well, we spit when we taste because you don't need to swallow it to assess it, fully and completely. You can get a little teeny bit go down your throat, but frankly, especially if you're tasting as a professional, and even if you claim to have a nice tolerance for alcohol, it's going to dull your judgment and your clarity of perception. So, as a professional, we always spit. It doesn't matter what you think you can metabolize. When you're working, you don't swallow because it just makes you slightly too relaxed. And the reality is, between your sense of smell and everything you're perceiving on the palate, including the finish, you don't need to swallow. So that's my opinion.
I have a question. I have a question here that I'm going to answer quickly. Lisa, thank you for your question. Will this webinar be available? Absolutely. We do try to post it 48 hours after the webinar. So you can always rewatch. It's on YouTube. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel and you'll get notified whenever we launch it. And then we have another question here, Maddie, from Jerry. Hey, Jerry, great to see you here. Would you describe an oily texture? I would describe as whole milk texture rather than 2% or skim. How would you talk about oily?
Well, you've been listening to how Evan Goldstein describes texture, which I think is spectacular because it's bang on the money. I would say this is a very interesting perception because if you can see past the acidity and the salty minerality, there is a weight to this wine and oiliness to this wine and a viscosity to this wine that is beautiful, and absolutely you're not hallucinating. So, considering the aromatics, one of the grape varieties that's not listed here that would come into play might be Viognier. Thinking about it in that respect. And looking at the ones that we've got, Friulano, Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio, and Pinot Blanc, I would say in considering those broadly, Pinot Blanc, oh, there it is. Pinot Blanc is the most neutral. Pinot Gris tends to be neutral, but especially from Alsace can have quite a bit of spice and weight and even sweetness. And Friulano, which is leading the pack in terms of the votes, is a very interesting grape variety that can absolutely be floral, spicy, and weighty. And it is something that reigns supreme in northeastern Italy. And then the regional associations, obviously Friulano for Italy, Pinot Gris could be Italy or France, correct? And when we're talking about Chile and California, probably Pinot Gris more than that. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
If you picked other and you want to share that would be really helpful as we show the reveal slides. But Maddie, I think this really points to an old world and folks in the audience are getting that old worldness.
And you know what? They are co-rectamundo, and they may describe it in different language than I did. but I really appreciated the commentary on the weight. So we are leaving Evan's home in the San Francisco Bay. We are taking one of my favorite trips, AKA on Google Earth. I have now become beautifully addicted to this. And if you're not familiar with it, everyone, it's a wonderful way to get a sense of the geographic terroir, particularly in terms of altitude, proximity to water, and important things like that. And we are indeed in northeastern Italy. We're in the far northeastern corner. We're at a wonderful family-owned and operated winery called Vigna Petrusa, which is owned by the beautiful Hildy Petrusa. And we're going to see a picture of her momentarily. So, in talking about Friulano, and I want to address that right up front, because it's something that is pervasive in this area, meaning if you order a glass of wine in a restaurant, chances are you're going to get a Friulano, which used to be called Tokai and drove the Hungarian folks crazy. So they managed to, we pivoted away from Tokai and now it's just Friulano, but this is a great variety. And by the way, the growing region for this particular cuvee is Collia Orientale, which is the A++ growing region for this and other native grapes in the area. It has a little bit more altitude in play and gentle hillsides, but it is, prime growing region for Friulano. And in general, what we've got is a grape variety whose thumbprint is that almond character, sometimes a little bit of grassiness. And by the way, its synonym, which is completely maddening, is called Sauvignon Nas. And it has absolutely nothing to do with Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc is not part of its parentage, though this is a grape that used to be planted with enthusiasm a long time ago in the Gironde, alongside Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon. It is known for being aromatic and floral, and it's for its minerality and its weight. And this is a 19, but I can see why we would accept 18 as well.
So we have a number of questions, Maddie. So number one, what do you think of Austria as a pick? I mean, it's right next to Austria.
Well, no, actually, Austria, in terms of geography, it's right there because it borders Austria and Slovenia, correct? The issue is, I don't know what grape variety you would pick from Austria, because I don't think it gives us Gruner, tags. I don't think it gives us Riesling tags. And also, so to me, we are, we're tucked in Italy for sure, even though, those are adjacent neighbors. And there's certainly Germanic and Slavic influence in this area. This is an area, by the way, if we can go to the next slide, that really exploded in the late 1960s and early 70s, thanks to modern winemaking techniques, aka temperature control, where all of a sudden this fresh, fruity, internationally styled in a good way, right? Wines exploded on the scene, and where this whole area, and Friuli really is a challenger to Trentino Alto Adige for this style of wine, both from native and international varietals, sort of exploded on the market. This there's the beautiful Hildy Petrusa, who also is very proud. You saw her winery. You couldn't get more attractive than that. Let's go. And she is very active in wine tourism. And we should mention, as we're staring at the gentle hillsides, that there is a specific earthiness to this wine that comes from something they call ponca. It's a calcareous marl with a little bit of sandstone in it. And parting shot, because this is important in terms of winemaking procedure, this wine has been fermented in stainless steel, but it is refined, as they like to say, at least a portion of it, in neutral large barrels for several months. And I think you do pick that up on both on the nose and on the finish. And I just love the combination of unctuous and refreshing at the same time. The winery actually goes to the trouble of saying that you should have this with cured ham or pad thai or chicken tandoori. And I vote for all of those.
There are a number of questions, so I want to make sure we get to all of them, and then we'll move very quickly. For those of you who are new to this, the sleeve here, this overlay, unveils the actual producer and the alcohol content. So the first question was about alcohol content Jill says it seems high on this wine. Is it normal for this variety? And taking a look at the alcohol content, it's 13.5.
Mhm.
So, but producers get to use up to 14.5. So what do you
Yes.
think?
Actually up to 15, I think, if they really wanted to. But it feels a little bit higher than 13.5 to me. But to be honest with you, I don't pay that close attention to the numbers. It is moderate alcohol, maybe moderate plus. It doesn't command my attention. The perception of alcohol, well, there is a perception of alcohol. It's not as if it's not there. But to me, it adds to the wine's weight, and it belongs in its structure. So, if I were to put a tag on it in master sommelier parlance, I would call this, what are we calling it? I would call it moderate plus, in alcohol. I think we officially on the website call it moderate. I would inch it a little bit higher because I feel it slightly in my chest, but I think it belongs. I don't think that it's screwing up the structure of the wine. Any other questions on this?
Last question, and we have to move on, even though they're a little bit.
I know I always drag my feet on wine number 1, but then I pay the price on wine number 6.
And then we got to go. All right. So Gewürztraminer, Viognier, or even Sauvignon Blanc were choices. Can you talk a little bit about whether you got that cat pee aroma?
No, I'm happy to talk about that. I didn't get cat pee. I get a teeny little bit of grapefruit on the nose and on the palate, but it's really secondary. It doesn't, and I don't find the aromatics, though they are distinctive and forthright, they are not perfumed. It's more apple blossom and lime lemon blossom. It's a different kind of aromatic. It's not, I think of the category of Muscat, Torrontés, Gewürztraminer, and on its heels, in a very classy way, Viognier. But I think this wine is a little bit different in its aromatic expression. Oh, by the way, parting shot, highly important. Some of you are going, oh my God, is this testable? And this is something that is Tim smiling. The reality is that some of the wines that we taste, and Evan and his team goes through a lot of trouble to pick them out, are not officially testable. And this may or may not be, especially on MS level, 4, if you want to talk about it that way. But it is a wine that we absolutely should be able to assess. And I think deductively could probably recognize. So hold that thought. We're not, this is important that to understand that these wines are picked out in a more inclusive way. Did I represent that correctly, Evan?
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
All right, wine number 2, Evan.
All right. First of all, thank you all for not joining Dry January and being here with us today. We don't have any. We have sommeliers here, not, as I've been reading these days, nomeliers. Anyway, I digress.
Oh yeah, and Evan, just to clarify, we're not saying that you have to spit these wines.
No,
we're
you don't
spitting because we want to make sure that we can get to 90 minutes without being drunk.
Right.
So go ahead, Evan.
But for a lot of you, it's Friday. It's 5 o'clock, right? So go for it. All right. Wine number 2 is a very different wine. Again, the questions that you see on the slide there are simply for thought starters for you in terms of being dry or fruity, or where dry and fruity and intersect. The florality, the type of fruit that you might find there, and again, textural. Madeline said it very well. Texture is important in wine, shouldn't drive your decisions, but it's certainly something you should be paying attention to. So right off the bat, the color here, always nice to do referential tasting. So as I'm looking at this one next to the wine 1, it too is sort of more of a golden hue, but perhaps not quite as deeply golden or deeply yellowed as it is before, but it shows pigment and it shows some color. Once again, that could be age, that could be wine production, that could be barrel aging, or some combination thereof. More importantly, let's focus where all the information, all the fun is in the nose and in the palate, and we always take those two together. Right off the bat, I am struck with fruit. So as people who know me know, I always look for a few things in a wine: fruit, earth, and wood being the 3 most prominent, and fruit for me covering anything that grows out of the ground. So not just fruit, but vegetables, herbs, spice, anything in that sort of organic thing. So here the fruit category sort of breaks down in 3. I think it's driven by tree fruits of sorts. I'm getting pear. I am getting fig for sure. And then I'm getting a sort of subplot of sweeter citrus, more along the lines of perhaps a riper grapefruit in the sort of white vein, not so much the pink vein, sort of Meyer lemons and things like that. A Meyer lemon being part lemon, part orange, for those of us who know. And then there's this sort of undercurrent of melon, both green and orange, and an undercurrent of some soft tropicality, not uber ripe, but just elements perhaps of like pineapple, maybe even a little mango for some people, but mostly pineapple for me. Then I'm getting some other elements. I'm getting florals here, particularly things I would call like, acacias, lemon blossoms, apple blossoms, things like that. Not as fragrant as roses per se, but not as dull as, I don't know, smelling a daisy or something like that. There's chamomile in here. There's ginger, and I would call this almost like the candied ginger that you can buy in the little jars and then chunk up and throw into your ginger snaps. There's a nuttiness too that like Madeline was talking about in her wine. But here to me, if it's sesame, it's more like, for those of you who know your candy, halava, or almost a little bit more of a marzipan-y type character. But again, sort of an interesting combination of that. Then it sort of moves to the right, and I'm picking a little bit of earthiness up, both in the form of sort of a soft minerality and inorganic earth, but also kind of lanolin-y, wet woolly sort of thing that's there. And then finally we move into wood, and I am definitely getting an oakiness here, not beat you up oak, but oak. And clearly this wine has seen some time in oak, and I would say probably based on the pronouncement of it, subtler, smaller volume, but younger age. Probably new oak on top of that. And it comes off to me in the form of sort of a soft vanillin, a little bit of coconuttiness, and a very kind of toffeed, caramelly sort of character. Bottom line, though, hell of a lot going on here. In the palate, the wine doesn't have the same sort of voluptuousness and textural richness that Madeline's wine here, but nor would I call it a lightsaber of acidity and austere wine. It's sort of falls somewhere in the middle. Obviously, it's kind of a semi-weighty variety. I'm picking up some weight, which I'm probably considering to be either lees contact, barrel age, combination of both, maybe a little bit of batonnage there. It's still bright. The acid is very crisp, very refreshing, very zesty, yet the palate is sort of creamy in the finish, and it's deceptively long. It doesn't rake you, but nevertheless, it keeps going on and on and on and on and on. And that's what I'm finding in this wine. I find it to be quality, but I think once again, I'm going to use your technique, Madeline. Summary quickly: fruit character, figginess, ripe tree fruit, soft underlying tropicality, a little bit of lanolin wool, a little bit of rock, a little bit of turned dirt, and then a creamy texture, bright acid, probably medium plus. I wouldn't push it as high. Oak content, soft but present, long, delicious wine, lot going on.
Awesome. All right, so let's see on the polls. We're going to have.
What do we got choices here?
We only had, by the way, 69% of people participating in the last one. So,
guys, there's nobody attributing it to your name.
It's anonymous.
No one knows what you think.
Water's fine. All right. We have choices. Chardonnay, we know, is sort of a grape that tends to be relatively neutral, and it's very much as much about the wine making and what the winemaker does, as much about the hand as it is the land. Torrentez is sort of a very voluptuous, full-bodied, super freak of a wine. Usually a lot going on there, very aromatic, very, very terpenic. For those of you who know the sort of terpene floral elements of wine. Semillon or a Semillon blend, always the slash blend means it can either be a pure play wine or could be blended with something else. Semillon being sort of in the middle there, having texture, but not being uber aromatic, and then vote for something else. And then of course your attributions of France could work across all of those except Torrentez. Spain could certainly work across the Chardonnay rather, and the Semillon. Argentina screams Torrentez, but could be others. And then Australia could be everything, because Aussies are everything.
And other is not a useless category. If you really don't relate to any of these, and I know you'd agree with me on this, Evan, please vote for it. And then in the chat room, you can say what you think it is. And one look at
You just muted yourself, Maddie.
One look at the label is worth $1,000. So it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. We're all learning.
Yeah, the reality is that looking at labels as you're tasting a wine should be as much about truth in advertising. Does it actually taste like what it says on the label? Sometimes it does. More often than not, it does. But we've all had Sauvignon Blancs that taste like Chardonnay. We've all had Chardonnays that tasted like Pinot Blanc. We've all had Pinot Noir that tastes like Syrah. and in fact, Syrah that tastes like Pinot Noir. So, use those things there. It's always most important, I believe, in blind tasting, not so much to nail the wine, but to nail your own subjectivity and being truthful to your own findings there, whether or not they agree with what you're actually seeing on the label.
Okay, 2 points. Number
Yep.
1, if you're writing in, only Evan, Maddie, Tim, and I are seeing your comments. If you don't, pick everyone. So do pick everyone, because we'll answer your questions, but it's a little more difficult to answer your questions that nobody else sees. There's a question here from Jerry that says, is there any mint in wine number 2, Evan?
Well, there's lots of different mints, and some of them are more subtle than others. Is this peppermint or spearmint? Probably not. Could there be a little bit of a lemon mint or something like that in there? Perhaps to you. I would suggest that there's probably an herbal character there. I described it as being sort of
Uh-oh, I think he was trying to say chamomile.
I think he might have frozen.
Yeah, he was definitely trying to say chamomile. And until Evan comes back on,
jumping
I'm just
out.
going, oh, there you go. Can you hear
Sorry
us?
about that. Yeah. Sorry, I popped out for a moment, but yeah, if you presuming you heard most of what I said,
Yep.
there is an herbal character to it. It could come off as sort of a lemon mint. It could come off as a chamomile. It could come off as sorrel. Definitely a little green, but not the dominant character there. Very much of a subtone.
Great.
Subnote.
Great. Evan, look at the results. It's actually a little.
I'm not seeing results.
oh.
They're not showing on my screen.
It's polarizing. So 40% think that it's from France, and about 57% think that it's from the New World. So any words of wisdom to help define between Old World and New World?
Yeah, well, New World is in general going to usually be driven by a fruit character first and an earth character last. Madeline's wine, I think, was truth in point that although there was a lot of fruit, and clearly it was a ripe year, if any of you were traveling in Europe in 2019, you remember what it was like back then. But nevertheless, there was this sort of, she called it almost like a saline minerality to it, which I would echo, whereas this wine has a softness to its minerality. It's not a huge deal, which therefore between really good fruit and a softness on the earthiness probably leads me more New World than Old. As far as it being French, could be French in grape and French in stylistic impression, yet still coming from the New World. So there are people in France these days who are making very New World oriented wines, but this one still comes off to me as being New World in actuality. So as we leave Italia, goodbye, Signora Petrusa. We're going to hike up here on Air MTW, get on the plane, head offwards, and we're going to leave Italy. And as we're going across Italy, I do think it's important to note that one of the things that Madeline pointed out in her wine as being sort of an interesting provenance profile was coming from an altitude. And within Italy, altitudes range. Here we're going to an area, and I think you said this is reflected in altitude as we end up in Argentina, specifically in Mendoza, specifically in the Uco Valley area there, where the wines are sitting. It's starting at about 3,000 feet. This particular wine, which comes from the fabulous bodega of Mendel wines in Mendoza, is a testament to different terrains. This wine happens to come from the Uco Valley, although they do make some lovely Malbecs from places like Luján de Cuyo and stuff closer to Mendoza city proper. This wine is, well, we'll give it away in a minute, but this wine is a Semillon. So this is interesting. Many of us, when we think of Argentina, the last thing we think about is Semillon. But Semillon is, in fact, one of the oldest grape varieties, white grape varieties, along with Torrontés, planted here, Chardonnay being a later arriver, other grapes being later arrivers. But Semillon and Malbec both came to Argentina over the Andes, where grape growing for vinifera wine started in Chile and were brought over. So in fact, it's arguably the oldest white, certainly known vinifera variety that we see, or Torrontés being more of a Criolla grape type, but it is classic. And it does show, for those people that were thinking that you were in France and that sort of wet woolly, lanolin-y, Semillon-esque character was giving you that impression, is very true to the grape type. And the winemaker here, the great great Roberto della Mota, one of the most renowned wineries of winemakers in Argentina, whose father was a winemaker. He's a winemaker, and is considered, along with Susana Balbo and Sebastian Zucardi on the younger side, to be sort of the most impression-driven winemakers today. These wines do come near the Andes in the Uco Valley, as I said. When it comes to a specific area called the Paja de Altamira, which sits in the La Consulta area of San Carlos, there is the great Roberto, and sitting right across from him is Annabel Seliki, who is his partner in Mendel. She is an ex-diplomat, in fact, was the ambassador to the United States for a while and living in Washington, D.C., came back, loved wine. Her and Roberto connected, and they made it together. It's 100% Semillon. So there is not a kiss of Sauvignon Blanc in there. And I think that perhaps what's most interesting about this wine is not only the truth to variety that I'm getting here in the textural as well as fig and pearish sort of nature of the Semillon fruit, that lanolin character, which is very Semillon, but also sort of the tribute to the old world. So although 90%, well, 85% of this wine has seen only stainless still, 15% of it is barrel fermented in new French oak annually with lees stirring, with batonnage, and it adds a complexity. Some of the richness is coming from the fact that the wines now, as opposed to the time when it came out and the notes were written, not my notes, their notes, are about 70 years old. I think I said 60 plus there. So now it's officially 70 years old because the vineyard was planted in 1942. It's at 3,600 feet altitude. And I can't speak enough about Roberto de la Mota. He is one of my 2 or 3 favorite winemakers in South America. Forget that he happens to be Argentinian. He will know more about winemaking than I will ever forget. And he, along with, as I said before, Susana Balbo, Alejandro Vigil, et cetera, are part of this generation of Argentine winemakers who are now consulting to other Argentinian properties as opposed to them hiring, respectfully, Michel Rolland, Paul Hobbs, and all these other Americans and French and foreigners to come in. They know their terroir best. They know what the grapes should express themselves as. And I think you're seeing that express itself in wines of the last 5 to 8 years. And this is a dynamite expression.
We have to catch up, but here's one final question before we move to you, Tim. And Tim, you'll help me catch up here, right? The
Sure.
same as in Australia, Semillon was an earlier grape. Do you think, Evan, there's a connection between the Australians making Semillon as an earlier grape? This is a question from Bill.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's a big difference here. I think you're picking up more ripeness and richness and time from the longer growing season, from the thermal amplitude of the higher stuff there. So although there's a nice acid to it, and it is in theory can be an earlier ripening grape, I think they're leaving it out a little bit longer, but they're maintaining the freshness because of the diurnal extremes. Semillon in Australia, most particularly in the Hunter Valley, which is probably what you're speaking to in your own experiences, is by definition picked early. I mean, they pick it weeks before they pick it everywhere else. That's also true in Margaret River. That's also true, honestly, in other places. They're going for a leaner, brighter style, shrill when they're young, oftentimes bottle aged before they're released. So they share grape in common, but philosophically quite different.
Great. Awesome. All right. Thank you, Evan. Tim, you're up.
Okay. Hello, everybody. So we're on to wine 3, the first of 4 red wines we're going to taste. And let's take a look at these questions because I think they may help point us in the right direction. The first one is to take a look at the wine's color, specifically the depth of color, and then what does it suggest in the context of what kind of red grape it could be made from, be it a thinner skinned, lighter pigmented grape like Pinot Noir, or the opposite, something like Syrah. And the second question, what are the most important non-fruit aromas and flavors in wine? And non-fruit to me is kind of like the main event. It's everything between the fruit and possibly earth and mineral if it's there, and then the oak. But what I call impact compounds, which are some of the most important aromas and flavors in wine, are non-fruit type things. So we'll pay attention to those. And then finally, what are the structural levels of the wine? Always a major thing to consider. And here, just specifically being mindful of the acid and alcohol levels, okay? And that telling you what kind of climate where the grapes were grown and the wine was produced. Okay, with that as a preamble, let's get to it. So as you hold your glass over white background, the wine is probably a medium ruby, a true ruby red. lines up to kind of a lighter ruby, almost pink fuchsia type rim if you want to get fancy. What else about it? It is almost clear. I can actually read through it. So this wine doesn't have a great depth of color like some other red wines. Okay. And then in terms of the tears, legs, Marangoni effect, whatever you want to call it, it's a solid medium. Notice how quickly they form, and they're fairly thin and they move fast. Okay. Now to the nose, the main event, everybody. Okay, there's a lot going on here. As you take a look at the grid that you're working with, the first several things are fruit. And here really the best thing to do is consider what kind of fruit. And with red wines, we're talking about color of fruit generally. So red fruit, which is usually tart, black fruit, riper blue fruit, riper yet, and then dried fruit, things like fig, raisin, prune, date, sultana, things like that. So the wine to me is predominantly red and black fruit together, but more red fruit than black. And red fruits being things like currant, cranberry, tart strawberry, maybe red raspberry. And those red fruits are tart and ripe and fresh. So very fresh more than anything. There's also darker black fruit. But again, these are black fruits that have acid, that have lift. So the first thing that I got out of that was blackberry, really tart blackberry, a lot of lift to it. Also maybe some just right black cherry and black raspberry. Again, things that are riper, but still with acid. Okay. And again, those are fresh, tart, and ripe. Now to non-fruit, which remember, just a heads up a few seconds ago, and there's a lot going here. At the top of the glass, right above it, there's some lovely floral notes. To me, there is rose, and there's also some lavender, and those are fresh. And then what comes across in the wine then is primarily what I call just green stuff. So herbs and vegetal type aromas. And there is tea leaf and bergamot. There is a laurel bush kind of quality. What else? Green tobacco, maybe a little bit of bell pepper and things that are green. And there's also some savory herbs as well. Also, I would just add some leafy greens like arugula to it as well. So a lot of green things in the non-fruit category along with floral. Now we'll move into the earth and mineral. And I would add that there's a mushroomy quality to it, and there's both earth and mineral together. The earth is kind of turned soil, maybe potting soil. And then there is a chalky, almost clay, especially on the palate quality. That's pretty prominent. And then what else? There's a little spicy quality like mustard seed that you get on the finish. And anything else? The oak aging of it's here is really secondary. And I'm thinking that used wood is on here. And if there's, I get that mainly from the texture on the finish. But in terms of new oak and all this really spicy vanilla, et cetera, not at all. Okay, retaste it again for structure. And after you taste it, just wait 3 to 5 seconds. Okay, a lot comes up. First of all, the green notes, and then the middle of the wine is really intense, that being the earth and mineral. Acid, salivary glands click in. It's medium plus acid easily. And then, someone was asking about higher alcohol in the first wine. A great check for alcohol is to take a sip, spit it out, or swallow it first, and then say, oh, and inhale, like this. And high alcohol will give you heat down in here, for sure. This wine, to me, I feel the heat like right here in the nasal cavity and right in my mouth, but no further. So the alcohol here is probably 13 and a half, maybe. And the acid reflects that because this is a place wherever the grapes were grown, they didn't get completely ripe. And there's a lot of acidity, a lot of ripe fruit flavors, and a lot of what the Brits call savory qualities, which is all the green herbal notes to the wine. And then the wine is really profoundly earthy, okay? The tannins here are medium at best. It's not a very tannic wine at all. Okay, with that, here is the envelope, straight from Lee Men. There are your choices, and very interesting choices indeed. You've got Gamay Dolcetto, Cabernet Franc Blend, and then Other, the notorious Other. And then your regional type choices or country choices would be France, certainly for Gamay and Cabernet Franc, Dolcetto and Italy together, certainly, and then Washington State for Cabernet Franc and New Zealand as well. Although I'm sure people are experimenting with everything in New Zealand, so nothing would surprise me there. Okay. All right.
Tim, a question here. I think this is a really good one from Lisa. Thank you for your tasting notes to Lisa. For those of you who don't mind sharing, we'd love to hear what you're tasting. But here's a question where she says, how can we deduce where a wine is from, country-wise, once we know the grape? And wondering how masters can know this. I find this to be so difficult. Tim, your answer.
Oh, Lisa, that's a short question with such a long answer. And not really to be shameless, but you know what? You need to buy my book. You really need to buy my book because there are multiple chapters that talk about classic grape varieties and where they're from. Okay. So, the wines that we, as we have studied and we continue in our career, we are tasting classic wines and they are from specific places. Some of the best Cabernet blends on the planet have always been from Bordeaux and they will always be from there. The greatest Pinot Noir for me still is from Burgundy. And so there are places, once you learn the grape varieties, that you always connect best examples to a specific place. And that's because of a historical track record. Sorry, not an easy answer, but you know what?
I have an easier answer, Tim.
Yeah, the fun of what we do, Lisa, is figuring this out, because to figure it out, you got to taste. It's not a bad
exactly. I think, Tim, that's the easy and fun answer. The good news is that in order to acquire that knowledge, you just have to taste some more. And here at Master the World, we really try not to trick you, right, Evan? The point is that we are associating choices and selections that put these great varieties best made from these places that are lined up, that are matched. We're not going to give you a Cabernet necessarily from Douro.
Yeah. Well, and this, tasting is hard enough, and that's why you have to stick to classics,
Mm-hmm.
But there is a method to the madness, and you have to remember that any of these wines are vetted by 3 master sommeliers. And, we never agree on anything.
No.
So it means it made it past true. 3 of us. Yeah.
All right, let's see how people did with the poll. I'm going to share the results right now. We've got 56% on Cabernet Franc, and then Gamay at number 2. Half of the people thought that. A quarter of the people thought that, I should say. And then 80% of people thought it was France. And then Italy had 12%. So definitely very old world guesses.
Yeah. Well, the first 2 thoughts. First of all, the wine is really marked by green character, right? And in this case, it's Parisines, right? So it's Cabernet family, whatever it is. And the second one, it is profoundly earthy. So I'm glad everybody went to the old world with it in France, because that's where they should have ended up. All right, so let's get on air MTW. And this is going to be a long flight, and it's going to be more than one flight for sure. Yeah.
Not direct.
Yeah, unless you've got a Learjet. No, and even then you'd probably have to stop, right? All right. Anyway, we're going to go from Argentina into the middle of France and the Touraine, which is almost in the center of France, not quite, in the Loire Valley. And yes, but an absolutely gorgeous place with chateaus, amazing food and cheeses and everything. And if we ever get the chance, I'll tell you, the one time in my entire life I was convinced to go horseback riding was at the Chateau de Chambord. And it was one of the most tragic hours of my life. But we'll save that for another time. Carla, this is when your wife says, honey, let's try this. And you go, but you don't say no strong enough. Okay, so we are at a small domain in Bourgogne, which is in the Touraine. It's called Domaine de la Butte. And it is, owned by Jackie Plot, who's really one of the great winemakers in the Loire, in the Touraine. He's got another domain that's called Domaine de la Taille au Loup, and produces Mont-Louis, which is Chenin Blanc, dry Chenin Blanc. And he's actually known as the maestro of Mont-Louis, which cracks me up. Anyway, so this is 100% Cabernet Franc. And Bourgogne, of course, is just north of the river, the Loire. There's a tributary called the Vienne, and Chinon is there. And again, all the wines there are Cabernet Franc. There are some really old vineyards here, well over a century old. The vines here are 35 years old. These are These are biodynamically farmed, hand harvested, native yeast fermentation, unfined, unfiltered, fermented in concrete, and then aged, I think, for a year in old oak. And a beautiful expression of Loire Sauvignon Blanc. This, to me, this is a place to keep your eyes on, because for an hour and a day, it reminds me of what happened to Cru Beaujolais within the last 10 years. And for an hour and a day, there are really old vines here, and there are people who are making brilliant wines. And Cabernet Franc, to me, can be really terroir specific. And so this is a place to keep your eye on. And also, at least for now, the wines are affordable and they're so delicious. And frankly, they are versatile with food because of the acidity. Colleagues, thoughts?
First, I would just say that, particularly as if you look at the price differential between Bourgogne and Chinon, which is literally just a river across, it's huge. I mean, arguably the fruit character can be a little bit more blown Chinon can be more earthy, and Bourgogne is known for being a little bit more fruit, but they're pretty much one and the same, but the pricing differentials are incredible. So oftentimes if you're sitting there going, my favorite wine has gotten really expensive, just look next door or across the river, across the tributary, and you'll find that to be the case. I thought your descriptions and discussion though were spot on, sir.
The only thing I'll add is that this is as good a Bourgogne as I've had. I mean, because sometimes I loved it. Very technical, Tim. The green stuff can really be, commanding to the point of being annoying, especially if the pyracines are running very high. And this is just not true in this wine. It's and I think it's Lori who loved it in capital letters, and so do I, Lori. It's a wine worth memorizing. I like saying that sometimes, especially. We talked about the whole testable business, but grape varieties that are or wines that are spectacular, except reflections of a classic category, and this is one of them.
Great.
Yeah,
all right, guys.
Maddie, you make a great point. Usually these wines are very purezenic, but the reason, and I forgot to mention this in the winemaking, is that this is made with destemmed grapes. Common winemaking practice in Chinon or Bourgogne is to ferment with stems. And that only exacerbates the green character. So, Maddie, to your point, I mean, this is really restrained in that. It's still there, but it doesn't dominate the wine, and it's lovely as a result.
All right, guys, we're going to have to speed. We got 35 minutes.
All right. On to wine number 4, and now for something completely different, which we love about these flights of wine. So let's take a look at your glass. Notice as you tilt it forward, the wine is opaque. You can't see through it. Great depth of color. I would call this an opaque ruby with purple. And even the rim, right up to the rim, is a really purple pink, deep hue. Okay, so what we have here are thicker skin, deeper pigmented grape or a blend of grapes, and a great depth of color. And I'm thinking that this wine, whatever it is, will show dominant with darker fruit, probably elevated alcohol. Tannin will probably be there too. So those are my expectations by looking at the glass. And also notice as you rotate it, it stains the glass. And that just speaks to really dense, saturated flavors in the wine. And also, if you want to get geeky, dry extract. So particulate matter in solution. So these are really ripe grapes, and probably the minimal finding and filtration went into the finishing of the wine. Okay. And on the nose, here we go. And all my expectations so far are true. The first thing I get is a whiff of alcohol. Okay, so this wine I think has high alcohol, probably 14.5 or higher. Okay, and I'll be curious though, because I want to taste it, because as with wine number 1, someone thought the alcohol was high, but to me, okay, if the alcohol is fine, high, so what? If the acid is there, which balances the wine, and the acid and the alcohol work together, the wine can be absolutely glorious regardless of the alcohol level. Something to keep in mind. The wine is predominantly though black fruits. So there's really ripe blackberry, black plum, black cherry, ripe, overripe, almost to the point of raisination, hence that connection to the high alcohol. There's also really ripe, almost stewed red fruit too, red plum, red cherry, almost overripe strawberry. And even here, we've got blueberry. This is almost smells like blueberry pie. So really ripe blueberries. Okay, so we've got 3 out of the 4 groups. And finally, I would say, yeah, for me, there's a little raisin and prune underneath. So wherever this wine was from, it's a warm climate, period, because you don't get raisinated fruit without a warm climate. Okay, on to the secondaries. Above the glass, there's a little lovely rose and maybe violet. That's fresh. And then from there, there's certainly some green components. There's like salad greens, like chard and maybe even arugula. And what else? There is some anise. There's what I call beetroot, which is like, fresh beets. There's fennel, maybe a little star anise. And what else? Once we get to the earth, once again, this wine is really, really earthy. And it's like, flint, struck together. It's like turn soil, mushroom, things like that. And there's definitely some oak aging here. You would expect a wine with this kind of color and intensity and ripe fruit to be oak aged, and it is. I think there is some partial new oak on this. I get that in the form of vanilla, dark spices, toast, and almost like bitter chocolate. Okay, and then let's taste it, please, and get the structure. Goodness, this is big wine. All right, so give it a few seconds. Without inhaling, I can feel heat here. So the alcohol is high, 14.5, 15%, 14.5. Okay, but notice salivary glands, they're still working, and that's medium plus acid. So to me, whatever this grape or blend is, there are some high acid grapes that can withstand, some pretty serious ripening. The tannin level is beyond medium plus. It's firm tannins. It's a big wine. It's a powerful finish, very long. What comes across is the fruit turns a little tartar, even though there's raisinated character. And then the wine comes, it's just profoundly earthy. It's like gravel and turn soil and rocks against each other. And really something, this is a wine that needs time in the cellar, or, it needs, I almost said live game, but I guess that wouldn't be right. So I think live game, that was a joke. Okay. So anyway, but it needs something with fat, protein, and salt. Okay. All right. So here's your poll. We've got Merlot blend. We've got Touriga Nacional blend, and we'll talk more about that in a second. And then we've got Grenache blend. Your country region choices or state choices would be France, Portugal, California, and Australia. And then always, if in doubt, go for other. Okay. All right. Yeah, let me see what we have.
So we have a good question here. Maddie answered it too. What flavors do you detect for oak? What kind of flavors are you using as that will trigger that oak element?
Okay, so Jerry, it's a combination of two things. One, there's the vanilla thing from the vanillin in the wood. Certainly get that. Some spices, but here to me, especially on the finish of the wine, it's smoke, toast, like bitter chocolate, and almost coffee. So bitter, smoky type things. And that to me points me to a certain oak versus another kind. Right.
Okay, I'm going to share the results. As time goes by, I don't know, they are all swallowing out there because the number of people participating goes down, or it's more confounding. But in any case, guys, again, it's an anonymous poll. Tim, we have a lot of people who think that it's Touriga, and we have a good contingent as a result, I think, from the old world. Any thoughts before we hit reveal?
Yeah, really quickly. So everybody, kudos to you for your process of deduction. And here it's more elimination than anything. So it's really taking a look at Merlot blend and Grenache blend and going, not really. For Merlot blend, this would be a little bit more Hello Kitty. It would be a little bit nicer in terms of the tannins and a prettier wine, and just a softer impression. In terms of the Grenache, the depth of color is way too much to begin with. And you would have all the savory pepper, hoisin, dried game, meat, all those things. And none of those things are in the wine. So that leaves you Touriga Nacional blend. And let's hop on Airlines MTW. And thankfully this time it would be a pretty quick flight. And we'd probably be going from, I don't know.
This is our budget airline. This is our budget.
Yeah, you'd have to go back to Paris, and then you'd have a quick flight to Lisbon. And then, and then it would be, what, about a 90-minute, 2-hour drive, Evan?
Yeah,
And Madeline,
yeah.
you've been there too, right? Yeah.
I have never
So,
been to the Douro.
Oh,
I've
don't bring
been-
up that
no,
Okay.
don't
subject.
bring that up. I've
You
been
could
to
fly,
other
and you probably
places.
fly into Oporto, right? Not
Okay, well,
necessarily.
that's true. You could
Yeah.
fly into Oporto. I flew, the one time I flew into Lisbon and then we drove up way too fast, by the
And it
way.
is a beautiful drive, yes.
Here we are in the middle of the Douro Valley where
Wow.
port has been produced forever and a day. And I went here in 2006, and this was really when the dry wines made from port varieties were first coming on the market. And I thought, man, these wines are going to be extraordinary. And this is a perfect example. This wine is from the Wine and Soul. It's located in the Chimo Corgu. That's the region near Pinhao. And this is from a 35-year-old vineyard. I'm sure that it's steep, it's terraced, it's basically solid rock. When I was there, Evan, you have seen this more than I have, they use dynamite sometimes to put in new vineyards because it's solid rock. And here, these vineyards are field blends. This particular vineyard is 35 years old. There's over 30 varieties in it and things. Certainly there's Touriga Nacional, hence the first name in the blend, which to me is Portugal's great red grape and capable of doing so much in different styles. There's also Tinto Roriz, which is just flew out the window.
Tempranillo, yeah.
Tempranillo.
Tempranillo.
And then Touriga Franca, and then any number of different grapes. And like port, this wine, is harvested by hand, and then all the fruit goes into these granite and stone lagares, these troughs, and it's trod by foot and done with native yeast. However, what is modern about this is that after it goes through malolactic, it's put into French oak, 50% new and 50% second barrel. So it's kind of a, perfect marriage of old versus new schools of winemaking. I don't know, a big fan. And Evan, I bet you know more about this estate and can add to it.
Yeah, no, Sandra and Jorge are one of the power couples in Portugal today. Her and her family originate from the area around Lisbon. She actually has a winery down there called Chocapalia with her family, and his family is ensconced in the Douro Valley. They are truly a great couple. They make all the wines for Wine and Soul as well as for the Quinta de Chocapalia, and are considered annually amongst the best of the best wines. Pintas and Pintas Character, but many others. They make port, of course, as well, and are just considered at the leading edge of quality in the Douro Valley today.
And if I just one little jump in here real quickly, Mang, sorry, because I want to slam this in. Tim, right up front, mentioned aromatically a distinctive florality. And that's something, thanks to you, Evan, from having tasted a slew of these wines at one point, that is my takeaway. Not only the color and the intensity and the extract and the black fruit, but also just this beautiful floral fragrance that the only time I can think of picking it up in wine of this color, but in a different way, is in concentrated Malbec. This couple is not only terrific, but they're easy on the eyes too, aren't they?
She was a model.
She was a model,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Before she did that, she won Miss whatever at some point in time. And
sorry, I feel bad when I do this when we're running out of time. I have a couple.
No, my job is the same time for Madeline, so
let's do this. Jerry has a great question here. Is this a blend with Touriga dominating, or is it are single varieties available?
Yeah, so many of these vineyards are literally field blends, and it's hard to predominate exact percentages. I always worry that very much by Bordeaux, when you read what they say, that's actually how the vineyard is planted and not necessarily how the wine is made. I would say that, to Madeline's point, the nature of the dark fruit and the florality, which is a particular flavor called Esteva, which is rock rose, and gives you sort of at once floral but also herbal element to it, is very classic of Touriga Nacional. And when you find that in predominance, it usually suggests a strong Touriga thing. But there is literally, there's Touriga Franca, there's Tinta Roriz, there's Tinta Cao, there's Bastardo, et cetera, Vignão, all these other things in there. Not to mention probably about 15 or 20 other grapes you've never heard of, all of whom will probably start at some point in time for the infield for the San Francisco Giants this year when the thing comes down. but
So
it's hard to predominate. But yeah, I would say that even if it's not completely dominant by Touriga, the Touriga is probably the most dominant element flavor-wise that I'm pulling in this wine.
great. And one other point is you guys who are new to our webinars, you saw the pricing over there. That pricing is the price of what a 750 ml equivalent would be at retail. So at MTW, we try to give you bottles that will average $30 at least at retail from a benchmark, but it's a high-low game. Some of the whites, some of the first two wines might be a little lower. And then as we get to the deeper, more expensive reds, certain regions of the world might get higher. So Evan and his team does a really good job of making sure that we're really balancing quality and character. And this one is definitely on the higher side of things, Evan.
Yeah, and I would just suggest to those of you as we move into the next wine who are not taking Portuguese Douro Red seriously, this is the anti-high prices of Bordeaux. This is the anti-high prices of California Cabernet. If you're looking for wines to cellar, to put away, birth years of kids, etc., and wines that merit that sort of same level of gravitas and will age gracefully in your cellar, do not overlook the Douro Valley, and I will move on from there. All right, so as we look at this next wine, wine 5, it too is a reasonably pigmented wine, certainly not as opaque or deeply colored or pigmented as what Tim just showed us from the Douro Valley, but nevertheless, it's got a good rich color to it. It is also ruby. I would say it doesn't have the youthful purpliness from the heavy pigmentation that Tim's wine had, nor when you swirl it does it quite stain the glass the same way, but nevertheless, it looks like a reasonably ample wine. I'm in the nose here, going back to Evan's FEW. This wine to me shows it wants elements of red and black fruit. The red comes off as sort of combinations of cranberry, red plum, maybe even like salted plum, if you've ever had that before, picking up on that kind of umami savoriness thing there. A little bit of cherry, black fruits more like black raspberry. Again, cherries, blackberries, things like that. A nice hint of sort of herbalness, herbality. Can you say that? Fennels, things like that, leafier greens. Then there's elements of lavender, for sure. Violety, maybe softly. That kind of thing that people refer to in many parts of the Mediterranean is like sort of an underbrushy garigi sort of thing that are there, that are combinations of wildflowers, herbs, flowers coming off of herbs, and just other local flora that you have there. Then I'm getting, as I swirl it, and you have to swirl it to really allow it to come out, because sort of they're buried, is a pepperiness. And the pepperiness is somewhere between green peppercorn, even more of like a rose pepper, like pink peppercorn, and then of course some black pepper, but not like cracked black pepper heavy. It has a licorice thing, as I said before, no strong oak. And then as you pay attention and dig in, a little bit of a maybe like kind of like a beef jerky, Slim Jim kind of character in there as well. That's sort of in the back, but again, this sort of lush, dark red and black fruit predominates. In the palate, it's actually surprisingly smooth. It doesn't have grittiness either. I mean, it has some grittiness, but the tannins are sort of not on the mean end of things, which could be echoed, by the way, by terroir, which I didn't talk about, which is there, but not a super predominant element of that wine. The acid is medium plus. It carries through everything. The tannins, I said, are present. I would actually call them medium plus, but well managed. And it's dry, of course. Oak is an afterthought. Clearly there's oak there, but it's not a driver of personality or of intent of style. And the other thing that's coming off to me is I'm glad to see all of our grape choices here are blends, because it does come off to me as a blend, as opposed to something that's sort of very mono variety in nature. Your choices are Touriga Nacional. Think about the wine you just had and how much this wine may or may not share in common with it. Syrah, and think about what you know about Syrah. And blended with other grapes that are kissing cousins living nearby, Malbec and friends, and then obviously the associated areas, Portugal for the Touriga, France for the Malbec and the Syrah. Although they can plant Touriga now in Bordeaux, don't forget that. California could be anything, of course, and Chile probably lending hard on the Syrah and Malbec side, although I've had Touriga from Chile as well too. And then other players to be named later. If you have some thoughts, let us know.
Great. So love the comments from Evan, Evan Rothrock. Thank you very much.
The other Evan
for tossing that in. Love it. Any other thoughts from folks as you answer the questions? I definitely see a slowdown. I think it's the alcohol in effect, or people are getting really shy with red wines. I'd love to hear it. Is it more difficult with reds than with whites to answer the poll? Because I think when we got to the reds, it definitely slowed down a little bit. And I'm going to end the poll in 10 seconds. Here's a great question. The smoke meats lead to Syrah. Is that appropriate?
It could very well be. I guess we're going to find out in a moment, but smoky and meaty are things that are often associated with Syrah, particularly Syrah coming from more moderate to cooler climates. It tends to jump out more. That's usually a character of both combination of winemaking style, how you manage your fruit, possibly what you're blending it with. But climate would be the biggest driver, because cooler climate brings out more of that compound that's called rotindon, which is what gives you the pepperiness in red wines in general and Syrah specifically.
Great. And we have a 48% in
Oh,
France.
guys, maybe they're just drunk. Maybe they're not taking dry January seriously at all. It's Friday afternoon. But do vote. Again, no attribution.
So we have, 48% in France and 48% in New World, and half of them in Chile and half of them in California. So I think it sounds like this wine's a little confusing. So we can reveal and we can talk about the confusion maybe.
With the understanding that I'm going to give it to Maddie in a minute, but yes, let's go through all of that. So let's hop on our puddle hopper out of the Douro Valley back to Porto and get on an international flight. And probably
aisle seat, business class.
Right? Yeah, I don't know. I think we're going to end up on Lufthansa, because you have to get back to the New World and back there. And for those of you who are not big, I'm not a big Lufthansa fan. I've only had pain flying Lufthansa, but they are efficient. They get you where you need to be. And as we leave the Douro Valley, we're going to stay up in the Northern Hemisphere for sure, but we're going to rock on back over, not too far from where we started at the beginning of the day, not at my house. There are no vineyards in my house, but we're going to go south, and we're going to go down to Santa Ynez and Santa Barbara County, and we're going to go specifically to Beckman Vineyards, which sits in the heart of Santa Ynez, and coming off of one of the two vineyards they own, the Purisma Mountain Vineyard, which sits in Ballard Canyon, one of the AVAs of this part of the world. This is from Beckman Vineyards. This is a namesake family-owned winery. Steve Beckman's son of Tom and Judy Beckman, who are the proprietors, is their winemaker. It is a blend. It is a SGM rather than a GSM blend. So it's Syrah driven, followed by Grenache, hence that play of black and red fruit that you see. The Mourvedre sort of reinforcing that little bit of pepperiness at the back. And the Counoise giving you the je ne sais quoi. The style, to Scott's point, spot on. They particularly are about elegance at Beckman, whether it's their Cabernet, which is, by the way, frickin' delicious, their Rhone blends or anything else. They're all about nuance rather than power. These wines are Burgundian, if I could say, almost in approach to every grape that they make. And it's just a delightful wine. I'd encourage you to explore this wine more from the standpoint not only of the wine, but also of the house. The Beckmans do a really good job. And as I said before, they're really about elegance more than power, nuance rather than beating you on the head, but absolute purity of expression of the individual grapes they work with, whether individually or assembled.
And one question so that we can get to Madeline, because people were picking 48% France and another 24% Chile, another 24% California. What do you think was sort of, breaking people up? Do they, is it difficult?
Yeah, if you think about this genre of varieties in the French part of the world, Rhone wines are inevitably going to have more terroir, whether it's stoniness coming down from the south, whether it's that sort of granity character there, but you're going to get a much more pronounced character of earth. Earth here is subtle. It's really about the fruit and the pepper. Syrah, that comes from relatively selected plots in cooler climate, is always going to give you the pepperiness. And because there is pepper there, most people will default to Northern Rhone. They might actually default to Australia, particularly in parts like over by Mount Langi near Great Western, where they make very peppery Syrahs. But Chile as well. If you are familiar with Syrah-based wines coming out of San Antonio, in the Aconcagua area, further north, up in Coquimbo, etc., they are quite peppery wines, and they are a little bit leaner and a little bit more shrill. And even by Chilean standards, they think of themselves as French. So there you see Beckmans, you see Steve, Jeff, and Tom. I thought Steve was a kid, but maybe I'm wrong. I guess it's his brother. Oh, I don't know. But anyway, multiple generations. I did get it right. It is a family winery, and they are doing a great job. If you're not familiar with Beckman, be familiar with Beckman. And on that note, I'm deferring my last as the senator from deferring to the senator from Michigan. Madeline, you get the rest of the floor time.
No political, That's the other beautiful thing about wine. And in addition to improving your metabolism, it pushes you in an inclusive state of mind and heart. So that said, I echo what Evan is saying about Beckman wines. They're just beautiful. And it is, by the way, easy aromatically to pick up both pepper and meat elements from Grenache and Syrah, but there are plenty of other factors that digress, notably color is a biggie. So, okay, wine number 6. Hey, I've got a full almost 10 minutes, Lee-May. I won't use it all, I promise. So, actually, we've had a lot of fun looking at the color of the reds, and I really encourage you to play with the last 3 so you can get a sense of, I think it was Tim that mentioned opaque when it came to the Douro. This, you can almost see your finger through it. That's a nice little measure of if it's opaque or not, but it definitely is deep color saturation. And not quite as bright. This is not a negative thing. And if you let your eye travel from the center to the very rim, the rim is, to me, rose with a little bit of purple in it. So it's definitely telegraphing a wine that's young. Purple tones signify that in red. And just to remind us all, as wine matures, you may down the road pick up a little bit of yellow in the rim, which can be a fingerprint for mature reds. There's plenty of saturation in this wine. It doesn't quite paint the glass the way the Douro did, but we've got some extract clinging. And let's go ahead and play with the aroma. I've got to tell you, the first thing that occurs to me is not quantifiable, but this nose is so pretty. It's the fruit is perfectly ripe. Red and black berries to me, red currant, red raspberry, black raspberry. There's no bitterness aromatically on it. There seems to be a little bit of a tart character too, almost like sour cherry, but I'll see what it does on the palate. I even think there's a little bit of blue fruit in this, because sometimes we can get precious on the color business, but this smells not like blueberry pie like the Douro did, but a little bit of maybe fresh tart blueberries. And we have really good ones in Michigan, so they come to mind with regularity. And again, we've been picking up a lot of floral on all of our reds, and we're not hallucinating or trying to find them. This to me is less pushy than, say, lavender and rose. It's more of a gentle violet, both fresh and maybe a little even potpourri tone. Really pretty florality. But on its heels, there is a very distinctive herbal element to this wine. Not pyracinic so much as herbal, so both fresh and dried mixed herbs, maybe a little bit of leaf, tobacco leaf or tea leaf. And it's really in harmony with the perfectly ripe red and black and even blueberries. There's a little bit of organic earthiness on the nose, kind of like, I'm no gardener, but I hang out with people who garden. So I know what turned earth smells like. And that's what this smells like to me. A little bit of a clay component. I'm going to go ahead and take it on the palate and see what happens there. And there is a simplicity on the nose too that speaks a bit to a young wine, a wine that's got promise. On the palate, wow, the promise is fulfilled in terms of fragrance and flavor, because there it all is. And in that respect, we can call this wine balanced, even in its youth between the nose and the palate. There's the perfectly ripe red and black raspberries, a little bit of sour cherry. I don't know if I'd go as far to say pomegranate, but there's a beautiful cleansing acidity to this wine. And actually the tannins, if I were to quantify them, would probably say medium plus, but they're finely grained. And there's a really beautiful balance, even friendly tension between the acidity and the tannin. They complement one another. They push one another forward, and it gives this wine a freshness. There is some inorganic earth in the finish. It rears its head a little bit. Kind of like a graphite character. By the way, you know, when we're doing this and we're describing the wine, we have gridded these before, and you're looking at some point in time, the Master of the World descriptions. But I think it's so incredibly important to be honest to the experience of the moment. Like Evan said wonderfully well a little while ago, you can be staring at the label and going, doesn't taste like Chardonnay to me, you know. So witnessing the wine in the moment is really important. And I'm describing what I perceive. Both on the nose and the palate, there is evidence of oak on this wine, in the form of probably a gentle vanilla, but it's not overt. And it's very well integrated, both on the nose and on the palate. So, you know, to pull back for a moment, this is a beautifully balanced wine that displays elements of both red and black fruit, herbal, you know, subtle oak tones. The finish is, I wouldn't say short, but it's not persistent. And I think it's because it's the wine's young. And I think as it ages, the wine will absolutely lengthen because the quality of fruit is so good. Medium to medium full-bodied, with a restraint and elegance that I really admired. Okay, where's the poll, Li Meng? And by the way, come on, surge back and just throw caution to the wind and weigh in
Your
on
last,
the
last
poll.
Yeah.
So we've got Cabernet Sauvignon or a blend, Carmenere or a blend, and Sangiovese or a blend. And that's interesting, those options, because Sangiovese will often have that same tension between acidity and tannin in terms of its structure. Carmenere displays green elements, though I would make a case that, you know, their its green elements can have a little bit more pushy pyroxenic character to it, though the best ones I've tasted, thanks to Evan, are very well balanced. And Cabernet Sauvignon, you know, depending how much is in the blend, can dominate. I call it the little black elephant in the room, you know, where it's the black fruit can command the attention and sometimes overshadow other wines. So I don't think this is an easy call. In terms of regions, we have France, Italy, Washington State, and Chile. So certainly for Cabernet, that could be Washington State or Chile. Carmenere would push us into Chile for sure. Sangiovese, Italy. And France, well, you know, there's Bordeaux, right? Which is part of the Cabernet Sauvignon consideration. So that said, have they surged back with enthusiasm, Li Meng? How are we doing?
I see today's polls as very a lot of answers that kind of, you know, pull 2 or 3 directions. As you can see here, I'm sharing the results. We've got pretty much a 3-way split here. Of course,
very cool.
Sangiovese is at 50%. But a 35% of folks are thinking that's Cabernet, and a 15% that's Carmenere. So all 3 things are significant.
And course, we have plenty of old and new world votes here, correct?
Exactly. So yes, it's Italy, Washington, and Chile. So if you look at it, it's 50-50. So
well, remember what I said. I don't think this is an easy wine. I really don't. I think you know, the combination of black and red fruit, the texture and the balance between the acidity and the tannin, and there is, you know, distinctive earthiness, both you know, organic and inorganic. But is it telling us it's old world? Because the reality is the new world can absolutely have an earthy component to it, no doubt about it. So drum roll. I'm in business class. I don't know what all y'all are doing, but you know, I paid money for it, or I talked someone into
Upgraded,
giving
you
it to me.
upgraded.
I
I will-
upgraded.
I will tell everyone, if you are feeling a little demoralized because this flight felt difficult to you, don't. It takes a lot of tasting, a lot of experience, a lot of kids. Keep tasting, keep drinking to help you get there, because it does take several times. And I hope as you sit here every webinar, you're feeling closer and closer to some of the key varieties.
And remember what I said, one look at the label's worth $1,000, you know,
Yes.
blind is blind, and it makes us honest and pay attention to the wine. If we can go to the flat maps,
Yeah,
quickly, because
absolutely.
this is New World, it is Washington State. It is a Cabernet blend. It is from Walla Walla, which beautifully straddles 2 states, Washington and Oregon, in the southeast corner, right up against the Blue Mountains. But if you're just hitting your head in frustration, I would say my question would be, which dominates Merlot? The Merlot in this is 37%, by the way. Cabernet Sauvignon is 55%. And I don't think Cabernet is, I don't think that little black elephant has sat on the Merlot. The Merlot is holding its own. And also it's got a significant amount, 6% of Cab Franc, and the gentleman who is the brains behind all of this, our beloved colleague, Doug Frost, MS MW. This has 2% Petit Verdot because he calls it the bitters in the cocktail. He likes to have that in this. And this is an AVA that has, cool nights coming down from the mountains. I think this is a really beautiful example of a Bordeaux style blend that actually Doug would be thrilled that so many of you thought it might be from the old world, because I was lucky enough to get on the phone with him right before our webinar, hoping to get some, insider info. And Doug is expressive, if nothing else. And he said that he wants this to be, to use, he said, a hackneyed phrase, a bridge between California and Bordeaux. And that's how he sees Walla Walla. Particularly, the sources he uses are in the upper elevation eastern end mostly. That he says he doesn't like the high pH and the low acid on the flatlands in Walla Walla. And they do at Ecolands, they're very thoughtful about when they harvest, and they tend to harvest a little bit intentionally on the earlier side because they want to preserve the freshness. This is the first time this cuvee has been released, and Rub Rum. I asked him where did this come from. He says it's Latin for red, which is in Latin it's pronounced rubrum, so that's how I should be saying it. He said also some people might want to ask the question, is red rum any relationship to the movie The Shining? And he said absolutely. So that was just Doug's,
That's
cheerful, open-hearted, minor perversity, But he is coming out actually with the white blend as well. That's going to be called Albus or White. That's a Sauvignon Blanc blend. But I just think this is a beautiful. And this is Doug's winemaker, Taylor Oswald. Whenever we compliment him on the wines, he says, Taylor makes the wine. And but he was inspired to go to Walla Walla, and I think his first release was in 2018 or 2019, and has received very favorable critical press right out of the gate. If those of you who are going, why did I think it was Sangiovese? You're not hallucinating, because the reality is the red fruit component, the earth component, the acidity, the fine grained tannins. I can see why you went there. And actually, I'm surprised staring at the cepage that
And the acidity.
And the acidity, that there is as much that there's as much Cabernet in it as it is, because I thought the red and black fruits were put pretty evenly balanced. So my 10 cents. Thank you, Doug, for being expressive about Rub Rum and the Walla Walla Valley, which means many waters in the local Native American dialect. I thought it was a beautiful kit. Thank you, everyone, for listening to us and being receptive to our commentary.
Absolutely. And I love, Madeline, that you called Doug today to get such a fresh perspective. As we built this new kit, we really wanted 6 bottles, 6 stories, you know, really give you an insight. And a special shout out to Silka from our team who pulls together the photos from all these producers and the Google Earth, because it really brings the stories, if you will, to life with every single webinar. And I also want to give a big shout out. You have no idea the kind of pain I put the winery team through trying to figure out how to build these boxes. We're still figuring it out. Big shout out to Barbara, one of our co-founders who leads the team here at the winery.
Yay,
and
Barbara.
to Scout and to Jesse and a team of actually some kids from a local high school who help us out too. And it's just a really family affair for even us here at Master of the World. So we, when I see comments from your guys' chat saying that you're really enjoying the flight, from the bottom of all our hearts, thank you so much for being here, for spending your Fridays with us. And we know that times are difficult and still to get our kids on a subscription. Thank you so much. We don't take any one of you for granted.